Welcome to my episode of The Table of Redemption. I am Rasheen Jamison-Richardson, host, founder, producer, editor, all these wonderful things that I'm getting myself into as I become a podcaster. Welcome to my journey, actually. Welcome to this platform where we are deeply concerned about the mental health, well-being, and spiritual upkeep of leaders around the world, especially in times of crises and disruption. One of the main goals is to hold space with colleagues, hold space with leaders from around the world who are working on their leadership. Some have it already worked out, some are on their way to working it out. But either way, the bottom line is that I'm here for the perfectly imperfect. And we are here to have a bundle of joy and fun as we're transitioning, right, from one phase to another phase, or as we're settling into the new us, or anything that we are doing to better ourselves as we better the world is what leadership redemption is all about. So today I have with me a very special guest, Scott Bauer. He is Harvard Graduate School of Education's Intellectual Contribution Award winner and my colleague from class of 2025 graduate. And I am here elated. And so I want to open and ask you, Scott, so what brings you to the table today, the table of redemption?
Hi, Rasheen. It's so wonderful to be here. Thank you. And I was summoned by you of all
Yeah.
people. There's no coincidence that I have been so honored to have this space to step into it with you. And I'm very excited because oftentimes I find myself in your seat talking with people and inviting them to step into a reflective space. But I feel really honored to have the chance to share out kind of what's going on with me and the work that I do, what brought me to the work, what inspires me about the not only like the why behind it, but like the people that I also kind of like gather with and draw strength from, and I think that that kind of like synergy and that sense of community building, it's so expansive and it's so needed in the world.
Mhm.
So the opportunity to connect with a wonderful educator and human being like yourself, and
Thank you.
and then have this recorded for
Mhm.
your podcast.
Mhm.
I feel like it's such a wonderful gift for me if I'm being selfish, but I
Yeah.
hope that others, those listening, find some value from it and enjoy the conversation.
Yes, well, thank you so much. Everyone, at the top of all of my podcast, you will find me blowing, I call it, I blow my guest head up. Okay. I go in really seriously about their accomplishments because they're so humble and they would never talk about their own accomplishments. But Scott is very accomplished. He is the president and founder, okay, and host of his own podcast called Be a Global Citizen exclamation mark. It is a calling. It is a clarion call, actually, much like this show that really wants to know, so what brings you to the table? Like, what are you doing to change humanity? How have you delved into some tough work and brought it to the forefront, which is tough by itself? So we're here to actually help him flex his muscles today. And yeah, hey, and so that we can vibe. Like, that's where we're going to vibe today around work and some of the topics he's been able to cover, some of the great guests he's been able to feature throughout his tenure as the host of his podcast. So, Scott, talk to us about Be a Global Citizen and let us know your vision. Let us know what was it that made you just say, I'm gonna do it. Like me, I'm in this seat from the vantage point of collaborative refinement of a framework of the leadership redemption framework that I built 20 years ago, but refined and brought into clarity and brought and modernized it here at Harvard Graduate School of Education. So I'm kind of like putting myself in a position to advance the framework, but it's through storytelling, narrative inquiry, through me sitting down with guests and hearing their love for their work, but also reviving their work and somehow infusing more hope into the work they do and sending them on their way. So, for Be a Global Citizen, talk to us a lot about what that podcast is about, what made you start it, and how successful have you been so far?
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much for this question, this opportunity to really think about my podcast and yeah, like to be able to like step back a little bit more and kind of just appreciate what the journey has been like because I started this podcast in November 2020.
Wow.
So that was the pandemic
Wow.
and at that time in 2020 I was living in São Paulo, Brazil.
Uh-huh.
I had been teaching at an international school there for for 4 years actually at that point. So I arrived there in 2016, and that's a whole nother story that I'll get into a little bit later.
Good.
But I think for so many people, the pandemic was such a reckoning of like what am I doing? How this concern not only for your own well-being and safety, but for those of for others right around you, and just like kind of I don't know like lonely, right? This isolation, right? Being
Yeah, for
kind
sure.
of like within your own like confinement of your apartment or house or wherever you were, and I think I was just feeling completely disempowered about like
Mm.
helpless to hear like like what can I do to make a difference in this world. I knew that I was making an impact with my students, but I felt like isn't there something else that I can do? And
Mm.
at that time one of my colleagues, a fellow teacher at the school, started this podcast. His name is Diogo. Shout out to Diogo, he's great. And he created this podcast series called Alô Quarentena, which literally means hello quarantine.
Okay.
Silly. But it was basically just him kind of trying to create a space for his students and to give them updates about his class and give them an opportunity to share their thoughts. And I was just like, that's awesome. Like, and then he was like, yeah, it's great. You don't even have to like pay anything. Here's like a free platform and just record on your phone and just do something. And so I remember hearing about that at the beginning of 2020, but I just sat on the idea. I felt like this, and I think this feeling is common to a lot of people who are thinking about podcasting. It's the question of like me, like really,
Yeah.
who am I to
Yes.
create a space like that? And then also this hesitancy about like, am I an expert on any of this? Really,
Mm.
that imposter syndrome I think is very strong because I
Yeah.
knew I wanted to talk about global citizenship. I mean, the subject that I was teaching at the high school was global politics. And
Okay.
so, so much of that local, global kind of like that dichotomy was like always kind of present in how I addressed various different political issues through case studies, this country, that country, right? And also another like foundational like something that was foundational for me as well in terms of like my passion for global citizenship was the fact that I attended a university for my undergrad program called Soka University of America, and
Mhm.
their mission statement is to foster a steady stream of global citizens
Mhm.
committed to living a contributive life. So it
Ooh.
brought these questions of like, well, what is a global citizen? And what does it mean to live a contributive life? These were very provocative for me, but definitely, I think at that time, that fertile soil of like planting that seed and just seeing like, now going out into the world, getting job experience, life happening, pandemic happening.
Mm.
I was really striving to like find a way to like live that mission statement in a way that was true to myself. And I
Yeah.
knew I was,
Yeah.
but the way in which like a podcast is something that you kind of put out there, right? You publish an episode, you invite a guest, you don't really know what they're going to share. It just kind of emerges and then you package it up and then ship it off. And I think that to be able to have that in like a kind of more solidified way, right? Like this is something I can put out there that's coming from my own passion.
Yeah.
Felt like the right thing to do, especially at a time when, again, I think so many people felt hopeless and
Yeah.
scared and fearful. So all that is to say, I heard about the idea of being like doing podcasting from this friend at the beginning of 2020, and it took me like 8 months. I was just like kind of sitting on this idea
Okay.
before I finally, before I finally was like, okay, I'm gonna do it. And so, my initial episodes, I just thought like, in teacher format, I'm going to kind of try to articulate global citizenship from my own understanding and from my own background. And a lot of it ties into, this kind of like broader worldview of like, like that kind of is anchored in Buddhist philosophy because my background, being that I went to a university, it's called Soka University. There's this, really rich history that it has with a lay Buddhist organization
Okay.
called the Soka Gakkai International.
Okay.
So, all of this, there's a lot of confluences and like kind of, bringing together. But, ultimately I was like, I'm just going to try to like explain it in a teacher way and just talk. But, I guess now what I can say is that like there's been so many different evolutions of my podcast from when I started and thinking, I'm just going to tell people what a global citizen is
Yeah.
to then I'm going to invite people to share their experiences are and what it means to them because I felt that rather than being an authority on the topic right from the get-go, which I did not believe I was,
Hmm.
but I really was just curious about like, do people think about this concept,
Wow.
and do they think on it like in a deeper way, not just a like slap a sticker on something and say global citizen, right?
You
That's
won.
yeah, exactly, right? People can look at that. I mean, a lot of international schools do this, right? They craft their mission statement and they put, a global leader, a global citizen, a global something without really, walking the talk,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's problematic as well. And so I really wanted and so that, that again, this space evolved where rather than just trying to get them to like just tell me what is your definition. It really became an exploration into their own journey as a that are not just teachers. I've had like actors, I've had activists, I've had a dentist, like I've had
Oh.
someone from like Sesame Street as well. I mean, it's like, I just kind of want to like bring together, wonderful people who are passionate about what they're doing.
Mhm.
And through their story, I think we see this kind of like, you know, this clarity about, wow, this is what's driving me to make my impact in the world
Mhm.
and that impact is uniquely yours.
Yeah.
I think people also suffer. You were talking about like, oh, these guests they're very humble. They don't want to say,
Yeah, they're
all the
very
wonderful
humble.
achievements that they do. Is so true. So again, these people I invite onto the space, they do the work, and they're so like, focused,
Yeah,
right?
on
But
the
they
work.
don't actually stop to like really appreciate right the totality of like what they're doing.
Hmm.
It's almost like this kind of like building of like a tsunami, and yet because we're just working day to day,
Hmm.
it's like you're only getting snippets or little bits of it, where you're able to kind of feel out what's really going on. So for me to like be able to validate them and provide them with like kindness and words of affirmation and just yeah kind of like encouragement, I just really feel that that's my way of encouraging them to continue, and I think that has a lot of resonance with the work that you're doing
Yeah,
on this podcast as well because it's difficult work and
yeah,
people do get run down and burnt
yes,
out,
yes.
and the environment that we are currently living in multiple dimensions of the word environment, just everything that's happening exerts a certain pressure and takes a certain toll on
Yes.
people. But I think that again, coming from that place of like empowerment, we don't give ourselves enough credit of like what we're able to pull out of our life.
Hmm.
And that is something that like actually is very interconnected in terms of like Buddhist philosophy
Hmm.
dialogue with each other. It's really about having that courage, like, wisdom, and compassion to like be able to like channel it and to know where to channel it. And so I get inspired when I hear so many wonderful people talking about how they channel that and how they, really, shine this light of hope in the direction that they want to see the world kind of, go towards. And yeah, and I just find that, as long as that ray exists, that beam of light, we'll be fine.
Yeah.
I think, again, like it's very easy to go the other way of just like all
Yes.
this darkness, just like,
Yes.
this is terrible. But, one beam of light, one candle, whatever it does to illuminate, that darkness will scatter immediately.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I think, the function of having the conversation, at least for the individual, right? That kind of life to life, that dialogue. But podcasting is great so that you can record it and then see how that continues to emanate and resonate with those who may not have been, in real time listening to the conversation, but can appreciate the substance of it and then the sincerity and authenticity of the guest who's really grappling with a lot, but not giving up. And
Yeah.
that's kind of like ultimately the whole point. It's like the resilience piece. It's perseverance. It's holding on to a dream
Hmm.
figures. So all of that is to say that the podcast has been a really wonderful tether for me
Mm.
amidst very difficult times like a pandemic. But also, I no longer live in Brazil. I actually moved back to California, which is where I'm originally from, in the LA area. And and yeah, I left in part because I felt that I needed to reconnect with my family. Pandemic really made it clear that I think it was time. I'd spent 6 years at that point being in Brazil, and also a very difficult breakup with a partner of mine. And so it just felt like everything suddenly collapsed in the most like beautiful and purposeful way. And
Yes.
then definitely that arc of like, redemption and like
Yes.
putting myself back together, I think has been really important. And then I did like a rebrand of my podcast to call it, like, maybe the podcast itself is called Be a Global Citizen, but I was kind of envisioning what would be like a larger umbrella to house the podcast. And so that's when the idea of this name of like Piece Together came about because I like puns and it's a little play on words because it's like
Uh-huh.
you are like, it's, you can only create peace together.
Together.
But you also got to piece together, right, various different aspects of like, yeah,
Okay.
our humanity, of like,
Okay.
our different strengths, different countries and cultures, and finding, there's that creative piece of like, how do we connect together and stay together? So, I don't know exactly what the full vision and where that will go,
Yeah.
but I just know that, like anything, being consistent and staying engaged is kind of like the way forward to be able to then look back and realize, wow, I've done quite a
Yeah.
and yeah, I'm just excited to continue connecting with people, especially over the past, couple of years. I've just been connecting with a lot of Harvard folk and, learn to change the world. That is also kind of like clarion call that, brings people to campus and I think it's something really special when you're able to like gather like-minded individuals
Yeah.
who again get inspired from one another and realize that they're not alone.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you for that. I learned so much about you just now, and I would love to delve into, um, well, I would like for my guests to really understand that when Scott won the Intellectual Contribution Award, that's an award that colleagues vote for you. That's what they think of you. So he's not just talking to talk. Like he has people that think he is brilliant and amazing and fantastic and courageous and smart. Okay. So be a global citizen. How much of that work helped you get into Harvard or help you advance towards, those platforms helped you do that? And I ask that because the work that I've done for 20 plus years, over 20 years, in rural arts development, nonprofit innovation, entrepreneurship, educational leadership organizations, right? That work was done across a 20-year span, and it was done in rural communities, impoverished communities, Title I communities, places where no one would want to go. Having accomplished, my background is in opera, choral conducting, music education, and doing all that. So doing that work at some point seemed like, what is this all about? But came out of that was Legacy School of Performing Arts Training Institute and all the other things I was able to do, expand it to 12 locations and be able to just do some advanced work. But at a time when a hurricane hit, my organization collapsed and destroyed everything. I then end up having a stroke. So I'm coming back from a stroke, right? And this is my first time back in the public eye after 7 years. So a lot of that dropped off of my radar, like all the struggle. But when it came time for me to decide redemption for me is what's the banner over my life, as that leader coming out of disaster, what was a large part of me going into Harvard was that work that was destroyed.
Yeah.
And I was floored when I sat down to write the statement of purpose, or floored like when you get awards, you just become enveloped in gratitude and humility. But I'm wondering if you even thought about this. How much of the work that you did in Brazil, okay, if we go back in Brazil, also in pandemic, also global citizen, played a role in you being this amazing colleague at Harvard at this time in your life?
Wow. Thank you for this question. And also thank you for sharing also like just your background. I'm learning so much about you as well. And again, just very inspired because there's actually this concept in Buddhism that's about and it comes from a 13th century monk, Japanese monk by the name of Nichiren Daishonin. And he says, like to turn poison into medicine, right?
Ooh.
Poison into medicine. There's
Ooh.
some complex alchemy going on with that.
Come on.
But right, but it's really, I think, from the depths of like suffering, again, bringing out something that you might not have realized you had, and to create something new that not only heals you, but heals those around you. And that's the light that shines out when you see someone who's really suffered, but then because of that appreciation and that gratitude, they can look back on that suffering and say, like, I had to go through that to be the person that I am
Yeah.
now.
Yes.
In the moment when you were, like everything was destroyed from the hurricane, when, in terms of like your health, all of that probably felt extremely painful
Yeah.
and a lot of questioning of like, why me? Why now?
Hmm.
But it's only, now when you're speaking to this audience and you're speaking with such conviction that it now makes sense. And I think when people hear that and they're in the depths of their own kind of struggle or
Yeah.
despair, they need to know that there's that light at the end of the tunnel that they'll be able to emerge and it'll be so wondrous, you
Yeah.
know? But like, and there's also another thing too, another kind of parable. And I'll answer your question.
Please, please, I'm enjoying it. Go for it.
But yeah, there's like this Buddhist parable of like this journey from like going from like one city to another, from Kamakura to Tokyo. They said that it's a journey that takes 12 days, 12 days walking. Because this is like
Okay.
way in the past. This is before they had like cars and stuff
Mhm.
like that. But it takes 12 days to walk from Kamakura to Tokyo. Um, and so if you walk 11 days and then you stop, you won't be able to actually see the sunrise, on the 12th day. So
Mhm.
it's like, but it's a difficult journey. So it's about like persisting and understanding that like, I'm not going to give up, even if I have to crawl until I get to the 12th day, you
Yeah.
know, what then lies before you is that beauty of like maybe yeah a sunset or a sunrise whatever that is, but also knowing that like you brought that out of yourself.
Wow.
So you're constant. I think we're constantly, especially as we get older, are proving to ourselves of us. And so that's kind of like the name of the game. But I think it requires a lot of like courage on our part to set a goal that maybe we think is ridiculous. Like for me now, going to answer your question, the idea of like leaving California and going to Brazil, probably seemed pretty ridiculous to a lot of people, especially my parents, because they were like, "Are you sure you don't want to just, I don't know, like have a normal path and just be here?"
Yeah.
But and like even before I went to Brazil, like I had been kind of just traveling around trying to find my way, just kind of taking opportunities as I saw them. So I was like, after graduating, I was like in Canada doing construction work with a friend.
Mm-hmm.
Totally unrelated. Great
Mm-hmm.
time though,
Mm-hmm.
shout out to Canada 'cause it's beautiful
Mm-hmm.
there. But then, then I kind of said, okay, I want to go to, I want to go to South America. I had done a study abroad there in Peru. So I figured, okay, I want to go there and just get better at Spanish. And and then I had in my head this idea of like taking a backpacking trip from Peru to come back to Los Angeles.
Okay.
Crazy, ill-advised. Who does that? But but I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna buy my one-way ticket, and I want to have this adventure.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in Peru. I was doing some work with some local NGOs and connecting with some people, getting better at Spanish. It was difficult, but it was part of that adventure that I was like kind of eyeing that, okay, I'm gonna go and walk back. Little did I know that an even bigger adventure was about to present itself in the form of a friend of mine in Brazil saying, "Hey, we're looking for an international English teacher. Would you like to, be a part of this team?" There's a lot of exciting things that are in the works, but yeah, we just need you to get here as soon as you can. You're going to teach English, and please stay for at least 2 years. And I had all
Mm-hmm.
these questions. I think normal questions about, well, am I going to get a visa? Where am I going to stay? How much money am I going to make?
Yes.
Pretty reasonable questions.
Yeah.
And you know what he said? He said, "Don't worry about it. We'll take care of you." And I was like, "What?" But you know what? It's okay. I just like took a leap of faith and I said, I'm gonna go, especially because it was, part of the network of schools that I had been associated with, like the SOCA schools. And truly, they were on the brink of like, opening up a brand new school, a brand new high school, and there was just a lot of things to set in motion. So I think, it took a lot of maybe it was just me being foolish, but I also think there was some courage to
Yeah.
just say like entertain that possibility and to just go.
Yeah.
So I feel like, there's nothing wasted in this life,
Yes.
because I could have chosen something else, but I didn't. And Brazil was not a cakewalk. I don't think it's for beginners. It really challenged me. I really felt like such an outsider in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. I mean, Brazilians come in all shapes and colors and sizes and all that stuff, right? That's
Mhm.
not the issue. It was more of how how I was able to like really like not just connect with my students, but also connect with those, like making friends and like learning the language and understanding the cultural social norms.
Mhm.
And so, there was like multiple struggles and challenges happening at the same time. But I feel like when I was like, fast forward coming back to California and then deciding, like I really want to just, I want to envision like something larger for this network of Soka schools that really have like at their core this kind of human, component of like how can like what if we were to imagine a system of education where the purpose of it is not like job advancement, you know?
Ooh.
What if we were to imagine that actually at the center of all of this is actually their happiness, you know?
Ooh.
It's
Come
crazy.
on.
It's
Come
crazy,
on. Come
right?
on.
So, that is like really what like I envision for like education in terms of like truly being humanistic or
Hmm.
like, there's a lot of talk about like human-centered or like, how we can like really like provide more personalization through like AI chatbots and all this other stuff. And
Hmm.
these technologies emerge and I think, there is value in that. But I still think that we're at a kind of point where like the system is so broken, it's so kind of, it's just so clear like it's
Yeah.
not working, that there's like a kind of like almost like spiritual and like philosophical revival or renaissance or whatever you want to call it
For sure.
that's going to be happening. And I actually just attended a conference recently at my alma mater over
Hmm.
in Orange County area,
Hmm.
and it was about global citizenship education. And some of the keynote speakers were talking about this moment of like true paradigm shift.
Yes.
Like we are going to get to a point where literally like there's no further path. It's literally like a drop in like a cliff.
Mm.
And then so what's going to take its place or what really is going to be like kind of taking root to then build anew. And like that's kind of where I see like the work, not just that I'm doing with my podcast, but the larger kind of like movement of educators who really buy into that idea and like truly believe that happiness. I mean, I'm not talking about like kind of fleeting, like kind of more superficial happiness, like I had a slice of cake and I'm very happy and content. But it's more of this unshakable like conviction of like what brings you fulfillment and what brings you joy, what brings you meaning. Ultimately, what is that purpose that you're driving towards, and then knowing that engaging in that work is creating value that wasn't there, that can be shared, and having that sense of like appreciation, right, that we were talking about, of knowing this is the impact that I'm able to make. And so when you're able to like hone that and encourage young people in that way, I think that's really going to shine bright. So all of that to say, like I've kind of been like on this journey where I'm like I've been very fortunate to be surrounded by really wonderful like educators and to have different experiences, internationally in Peru and Brazil, but then also coming back to California. And I think when it came to like applying for Hugsy, I initially was looking into the doctoral pathway, to be honest. But then as well. And then I decided I'm not going to apply. And I felt relieved and very like, sad at the same time. Like, like,
Okay.
oh, I got cold feet. Oh, I didn't do it, right? But then like right after that, I saw that there was this, new program at Hugsy that was the, education leadership. And like in that moment, it like really clicked. It was like one of those kind of decisions where like it's so obvious. I'm like, yeah, of course I'm gonna apply for this.
Mhm.
And there wasn't actually any other program that I applied to. I was just like, yeah, I'm just gonna apply to this one.
Yeah.
And then, see what happens. And I feel like in terms of like what I put down, it included my time in Brazil, and I did talk about my podcast, but I do feel like what really helped me get in probably was that like I just like leaned fully into my identity as someone who comes from this background of soka. And soka is actually a Japanese neologism. It means value creation. And
Mhm.
so, I've been nurtured in a kind of like garden of soka, not only having gone to university at a school, right, like that has these Buddhist principles of like peace, human rights, sanctity of life, and it's like this feeling of like this is just who I am, and like you can take it or leave it.
Yeah.
It's like it wasn't like like I was going to be completely devastated if I didn't get in, but it was more of like this could build a new like network of people,
Yeah.
that I can be inspired by, and this could mark a new checkpoint for me
Mhm.
in terms of like how do I approach the work. And so then, when I got in and then started connecting with people in my program, and again, amazing educators from all around the world, I already knew like, oh, I'm gonna have them on my podcast. This is
Yeah.
gonna be great. And I actually made a very bold declaration to them at the very start of the program. I remember I think we were like in Larson Hall, and like, we were in this kind of, this classroom, and one of our professors asked us like, what do you want to achieve in these next, like 2 years? And I said, I want to have everyone on my podcast. And
Yeah.
like people are just like clapping. They're like, oh, okay. Like, sure. They probably forgot I even had a podcast. It's no big deal. But I was serious. And so, 2 years, right? In the blink, like two blinks of my eyes, and then 2 years have gone. And I was able to interview like two-thirds of them. So around like there's like 65 out of like 90 people in my cohort. I know.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, so it was like it was a way for me to like build community with my classmates. It was, to inspire them because, they're all like working full-time jobs while doing a part-time online master's program, and then it's from Harvard, so it just feels heavier a little
Yeah.
bit. And it's then there's a lot of work, but to be able to like really like say like, oh, I learned something about Scott when he shared his story, but it's more so like I realized how similar we are in this way, or I learned something different about how they approached this issue,
Yeah.
or like whatever it was, they recommended a book that like I really want to
Mhm.
follow up and read.
Yeah.
There's just like this feeling that you really know them and you want them to succeed. And I
Mhm.
think when we're able to create that kind of a culture, not just at a place like Harvard, but around the world, where their success is your success. I mean,
Yeah.
whoa, yeah, that's not very like neoliberal, you know.
Hmm.
And we live in a very cutthroat kind of world where that feels threatening. But if we can have a culture of care that really uplifts the other person and doesn't feel like intimidated by an achievement of being able to launch a school or being
Yeah.
able to support an aging family member in a difficult time, right? Or whatever it might be. I think that shows me that there's so much more like work that we can do to build those communities, like
Hmm.
wherever they are, right? So it's kind of
Yeah.
like this ripple effect.
Yeah.
And I think that because I was able to do that work kind of like out of like a place of like a passion project, and hopefully engage them, not like like, okay, you're going to be like telling me all the nitty gritty of your job and it's this purpose. Like it was really just open. It was really whatever, like as safe a space I could create for them to just talk. I think people really gravitated towards that, and then it became this like badge of honor. They're like, oh yeah, I got to be on the podcast, and like, so like let's get that other person, so and so to be on it next, and so I'm still doing the work. I still haven't gotten everyone, all of us, but it's just kind of like it just doesn't stop. It's just kind of become something like part of who I am. And I think by the time we ended the program, it's about the connections that we make, and I think people felt very strongly that I had encouraged them
Hmm.
in a way that like helped them get through the day or helped them see the program in like a deeper way. Because thinking, oh, it's online, like we all had Zoom fatigue, like I get it,
Hmm.
but envisioning different creative ways to create a community, that was something that I really was intentional about. And
Hmm.
not just through the podcast, I would also travel quite a bit, so I would home visit a lot of them. And
Oh,
like
awesome.
yeah, so I was able to like travel to like Singapore and visit one of my classmates over at the like one of the UWC, the United World Colleges there. I like traveled to China and like visited several of my classmates who were there. One of them had a school, and like to be able to like take a tour was really wonderful. And then even here in the US, like in like Chicago, Florida, New York, and then also just in my immediate like location in Los Angeles, I think it's about not letting opportunities for connection slip away, and just
Hmm.
like taking action to say this is valuable. And I always like I also became like the selfie king. I would always take a selfie to show everyone like, hey, this happened.
Yeah.
We're making connections in person and online.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people yeah, they felt very like refreshed by that. So yeah, so then they said, hey, we voted for you to receive like one of the two awards, and I just felt like so honored by that, of course, and appreciative. But I also feel like it's just been like it's like a slow burn, since
Mm.
I decided to go to Brazil, since I decided to go to this university that has a mission statement of being a global citizen. I mean, it all makes sense in hindsight. But I also kind of feel like it's just the beginning. So while the recognition was like truly wonderful, and I felt like, wow, like these other people on the stage are incredible, and I want to learn from them too. I also still feel like, there's so much more, and I'm excited that like in another, 5 years, 10 years from now, to be able to look back and really understand like the causes that I've made present were really like crucial to like build out this foundation, build out a community.
I want to review a little bit for our listeners. So far, Scott has shared his background in terms of being the podcast founder and also his journey. It wasn't just an overnight wonder. Like this has been going on since 2020. We're about to be in 2026 in a few more months. I also want to just also paint the picture of a real person, like because a lot of times when you get titles on you, you get position. One of the things I always would teach about is the philosophy of personality power versus position power. A lot of people have personality power and they drive their position through that. A lot of people have position power, then they drive through their personality. So no one really is really just quite settled yet until you have to wade through all those things. The thing I love about my show is wading through each episode and going through the foundation, laying a very rich foundation so that we can tell the difference between Scott as a personality, as charismatic, as a one who's a spiritual light, and then Scott who is the founder of this or the organization leader of this and all these things that he's able to position himself to do. So my body of work in leadership redemption works to make sure we see human beings as who they are, what they bring. So my time with Scott so far has been intentionally letting you hear that he has both a personality that is wide or let's say encompassing, right? A global. So it makes sense his podcast would be Global Citizen when you hear that he's been to Peru, Singapore, China, California, and God knows where else he's been in between. He hadn't said yet, okay? But then when you look at the way Scott is positioned in the world as someone who I call a vessel. So Scott is giving us an insight into his world, not just his world as a leader, but his world in his spirituality in Buddhism and what all that means. And then also he's taught in Peru. Then he's also went to school that is grounded in Japanese philosophy, theology, and all of the other principles or I call the root system of what makes Scott who he is. So as we are here today, so far, I want you to be able to see very clearly that he has a heart that's bigger than the whole universe. His dreams. I'm falling in love so far with what you were talking about with happiness at the core center, and not just a fleeting happiness or happiness that is void of suffering or void of challenge or void of being triumphant, but it's included that when we decide to be purposeful, when we decide to be resilient, when I'm going back to the framework, right? When we decide to obey our human intuition, when we decide to walk into all these other areas of our lives, we become happy people. And so what does that look like when we scale it is what Scott is saying into a school, and we start out our babies young, understanding what it means to be a purpose-centered or purpose-driven citizen of this world. So Scott, I want to now go back to your family, your root system that you are in Peru, was in Peru, Brazil, Singapore, California, all these things. So take us back to the way you grew up, though, because that could be an arch of redemption that is going to inspire someone to say that, you know, that from the beginning, I was like this when I was a child. Or maybe there were some elements when you were a child that make sure that you are taking a life as an adventure to this as a discovery that matches the Buddhist side of who you are right now.
Mm. Yeah, thank you so much for that question. Our childhoods are so important, and my parents were so fundamental to, shaping who I am.
And can you
Uh,
say their names, your parents' names, so we can say,
of
hey?
course. Yeah. Okay. So shout out to my mom, Beth, and then my dad, David.
Okay, go for it.
Hey. And funny, my mom is like my first listener on my podcast. And
Okay.
so she's listened to every single episode and she's given me wonderfully honest feedback that sometimes was very critical. And I would tell my mom all the time, if my listenership remained at one, I would know who it was. It's
Yeah.
you. And I might just have to stop because I need to do something better with my time. But yes, thankfully there's a few more. But yeah, so I grew up. I was born and raised in Torrance, California,
Okay.
which is in LA County area, and I grew up relatively close to the ocean. And I feel like, I kind of grew up in like a bubble, right? Because
Okay.
it was very privileged in that, like, it's like both my parents had stable jobs working at different hospitals, healthcare profession. There was this sense that, they just kind of wanted us to, I don't know, have like that normal kind of upbringing where you go to the public schools and, do some extracurriculars. I did soccer, I did swim,
Mhm.
and, hang out with your friends, and then, yeah, and then graduate and go to some college. So it kind of felt like, for me, just very sheltered and safe about being global citizen. And there's actually, like half the student body is coming from outside of the United States. So it's
Mm.
very international. It felt like a mini United Nations. And these amazing individuals are like speaking different languages, and I was like, I can't speak any any cool language. I barely know English. I felt like I was comparing myself so much. And so I was just like kind of wondering like what else is out there. And that's what ignited this sense of like, what happens when you put what happens when you go out of your comfort zone, right? What happens when you leave the bubble? And I
Mm.
was starting, it was almost like this scaffolding process of like, being able to travel with a class, like a group of students, for a period of like 2 weeks to a different country. I remember the first time I went to Brazil was through this class called a learning cluster, and we learned about urban poverty, and we
Okay.
worked with like a nonprofit called Child Fund International, and it was just the best thing. It was so beautiful to be exposed to like the rich culture of Brazil, to meet the people, to have these conversations where like in my broken Spanish, I was trying to communicate with a Brazilian youth who only spoke Portuguese, and just trying to like connect. I think that was the exercise. And I think what makes being able to go abroad so powerful is that you don't have to know the language, but you have to have the desire to want to know about them,
Oh.
right? And
Mhm.
oftentimes, I think a lot of times, the American kind of perspective is, if you don't understand, you just kind of
And
close
go.
off or cut off and just move on. There's this sacrifice of like, the efficiency of like how this connection will be created and how that connection will benefit me, that is just very not friendly. It's not conducive to creating friendships. And I think,
Mm.
actually the word friendship is very pivotal in my own formation, because I really, I really felt like, it's a difficult skill to build a real friend, and to have that stronger connection, and knowing that it's not going to happen unless you make that effort.
Mm.
So that arc kind of took me from like my bubble living in the South Bay, and then brought me to the university. But you asked about my parents, so I should probably talk a little bit more.
Yeah.
My mom is actually a Korean immigrant, so she
Okay.
came to the U.S. from South Korea when she was 16 years old. Uh, and comes from a background where he I don't think he truly even knows like where his ancestry is. It is that just kind of generic and white guy. It's like- I
Mhm.
know it's people are always like, hey, don't you do like ancestry, or and no. I asked my grandparents and they're just like, oh, came from Montana. Okay, sure. So my dad's white, my mom's Korean,
Mhm.
but my mom is, she's very much like a kind of like go-getter, ambitious, very driven. And she would share about her life in Korea. And this was like, growing up in like the 60s and like early 70s. Korea was a very different place than it is now. And it was just a place of just abject poverty. And she grew up with, there were 11 brothers and sisters, and they were on a farm. And she'd share these stories of how they just did not have enough food, and they would just like they would walk miles and miles
Yeah.
to get to school in the snow. And actually, it was like debated whether my mom would even go to middle school, because like she's a girl. And what's the value in having, your daughters go to school? Like that was the kind of environment that she was brought up in. And her life totally changed when she came to the US. And I think a lot of those traumas, for better or worse, right? I mean, like it fueled her to establish herself in the US,
Hmm.
to start a career as a nurse, and then started a family. But unintentionally, I think she would share out like what that world was like. Hey, so I didn't have anything, but you have all this stuff, so you
Yeah.
should be appreciative.
Yeah.
She would, say like, oh, for my birthday, I would get like a little tiny piece of like hard candy that they would like, they would hit with like a hammer, and they would spread out all these little shards, and that would be divided amongst them, and that was their like birthday present. And then here I was, a little brat, saying, I want an Xbox. She was like, I don't know if you're gonna get the Xbox, but it would send a message. And for me, I think that message was like, there's like this distant world out there of like South Korea that my mom experienced, of like what, misery and suffering is. And it kind of created this almost like romanticized image of like, wow, like she struggled in that way. And
Yeah.
I think in a sense, like I've kind of felt like I've never felt that way, like what would that mean? Well, to live in like, not like I'm like purposely wanting to like just throw myself into like poverty or anything like that, but there was just like this kind of like, curiosity of like how can I empathize,
Yeah.
so I think part of me going to this university, and in a very positive way, everyone being like awesome and just from different parts of the world and saying, yeah, let's live the mission. And I'm like,
Mm.
what? But then I think then taking action by going out of my comfort zone and being able to like experience different cultures and visit places that, yeah, had I mean like various different countries in South America that I'd visited. You saw that abject poverty, right? It was there. It was in your face, right?
Mm.
And I felt like in a way I needed to build my own kind of narrative of like what my journey was. Again,
Mm.
growing up, the narrative of my mom was just so overwhelming.
Mm.
It was so in my face. And I felt, well, okay, I'm going to kind of chart my own path, and I'm going to have these experiences, and then I can share it with my mom and with others.
Mm.
And, like it's not to compare and to say one was more meaningful than the other, one was more difficult than the other. But I
Mhm.
think I just, maybe there was that seed planted from an early age of like, what is my story? I don't know. And then, that youthful anxiety that I think, we all experience of, I want to figure it out now,
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
realizing, no, it takes, decades, right? I mean,
Yeah.
until now I'm in my early 30s, and
Mhm.
I feel like I'm still putting the final touches on like what that kind of like youth
Ooh.
foundation is.
Ooh.
But the critical period of it, going to college, going to Brazil in my mid 20s, and just, just being uncomfortable. You know, it was very uncomfortable to learn Portuguese. It was very uncomfortable to be away from my family. It was very uncomfortable to start being a teacher with kind of little guidance, and they just threw all the classes at me because, being a native English speaker, they had this very mistaken view that I would be really good at teaching right from the get-go just because I can speak it well, and that's not how it works,
Mhm.
as if like, oh, just talk normally and then that'll be enough for them to like pick up your accent. And it's like, no, not really. There's really wonderful, educators that there's the science to teaching and the art of teaching, and it's not just about the aesthetics of how the language sounds.
Mhm.
It's how you grow that relationship within you to then voice that, to have the confidence of that voice,
Mhm.
especially at a time when they're younger. So I'm like getting on like my little pedestal of like language teaching, but like, it's like it's hard enough for like a young person to even speak confidently in their native tongue, let
Yeah.
alone a, second or third language. So, all of that was taking place, and it definitely wore me down.
Mhm.
And there definitely were periods of like burnout that I experienced as well. But I feel like that's going into like another topic. All of that is to say, I think, my parents get afforded me like this incredible childhood of like stability, and safety, and I deeply appreciate them for that. And I really appreciate my mom for she was the one that told me I should really apply to this university, Soka University of America, because she is a practitioner of this particular sect of Buddhism called Nichiren Buddhism, and it's through the Soka Gakkai International. And so she would always pull me to like meeting both my sister and I have an older sister. We would
What's her name? What's her name? What's her
Her
name?
name is Julie. Yeah. Shout out to
Julie.
Julie. Hello, Julie. Yes, she's wonderful. And so yeah, we would always get dragged to these Buddhist meetings in the same way that I would imagine little kids get dragged, to church,
Yes.
We're gonna go. And I was like, I don't want to go. Like this is I have such deep appreciation for, because whether like as a young person you realize it or not, those are the nutrients that
Yes.
it's just all around you. It's you absorb it in the air and yeah, in every encounter. And so she helped me with valuing the Buddhist traditions of like how I approach struggles and obstacles and what are the tools that I can use to really pick myself back up. And then, yeah, and then, really saying, hey, this university will be great just because it has those values at its core. So just go, right? And again, like the university, it's non-sectarian. It's not like they're only accepting Buddhists to go there. Really, it embraces fully diversity in all its different forms, not just international diversity, but there was diversity in terms of like how old people were going there, and there was diversity in terms of the languages or the different like experiences that they had leading up to it, and so I just feel like all of that. I just have deep appreciation for like establishing myself as like someone who genuinely wants to like connect with people in a way like kind of like using this like altruistic flame as like an analogy of like it's just like how to like kind of have this flame burn that much brighter with a network of like-minded individuals. And yeah, and again, not everyone is a Buddhist there, but I think everyone can appreciate these common values. And then again, lean into the diversity of like, well, maybe you practice a different religion, but like, like at the end of the day, like if that religion helps you or that spiritual belief helps you to be a better person and to like make your impact, that's amazing. And then that's like interfaith kind of dialogue that I think is really encouraged. So yeah.
It's a great segue as well. For one, let me go back a little bit because now I'm understanding what makes Scott Bauer Scott Bauer. It's almost like if I had to write up the story, Scott Bauer is nothing without Beth, David, Julie. Beth mom, David dad,
Yeah. Julie.
Julie,
Yeah, just
his
Julie.
sister. So at the foundation of redemptive leaders, redemptive leadership, I posit that it's generational.
Hmm.
So whereas we get a chance to meet you at Hugsy and our work, my podcast and my framework goes to understanding a little bit deeper of how you got your springboard and how you got your courage, how you was able to use this platform of what mom and dad were able to do as a trampoline into or even the ocean, even the simile of the ocean, the metaphors of the ocean to kind of like springboard off of the suffering that they went through or the triumph into now being able to swim or flow, get a greater flow into the lifestyle that you wanted to build out in terms of a narrative that would help you understand even mom's journey more and understand your own identity more and understand what community looks like by not just saying it or just labeling it, but by exuding it and living it out. That's one of the main things I appreciate about me asking you to go back a little bit because now I actually have never met mom. I have never met dad. I've not met Julie, but yet I have when I meet you.
Yeah, I love that. That
But I
makes it.
have actually, and I would love to meet them, in any format, whether it's Zoom or whatever, to be able to do that because it's so critical that we we take time, right, to go back and to look at how redemption is born in us at all. And when I use the word redemption, in some instances, I've had to go through lengths before over 20 years of dealing with this word to expand it, that it is beyond the religious borders, even though you can ground it in that. It's beyond a cultural, a race. It's beyond a socioeconomic status. It's a real thing. It's a vibe. One definition could be a return to blase blase. One could be rooted in atonement. I'm so sorry for what I did, a form of penance. One in the sports world is that I'm going to win it again. I might have lost this game, but give me next season. We're going to dunk on them, like, right? And but then one of the major ones I love to use throughout my framework building and throughout going, through the podcast with my guests is the redemption arc. And you've used the word arc throughout our time so far, which is what I love. And so, therefore, whatever your problem of practice is, whatever it may be, it is an equal and fair opportunity for you to be as diverse, devoted, spiritual. My framework is very much in infusing that when you come across your problem of practice, or whatever the breakup was, or whatever transition was from California to Peru, from Peru to Brazil, then Brazil back to Orange County, then to Harvard, then all of these different things that'll make somebody else say, "What? You did all of that?" But yet we're here saying that through the lens of redemption, Scott looks just like he is one that is grounded and bathed in opportunities of grace and mercy and fortune and being able to have levels of gratitude, because there's so many things that could have went wrong, or things that did go wrong, or things that he probably felt like were wrong, but yet he's here using his work to give a light or weight or platform to someone else, and what I like to call safe arrivals. So one of the things that he's done for me personally was give me a bit more hope and give me a bit more light on the diversity, not just in him being a global citizen, but the diversity in his mixed background, right? And also his faith, his spiritual faith. I love the way he is so consistent and persistent from the time we got on our podcast to now, to talking about his faith. It is so critical that when we are talking about any form of this redemptive leader that I see around the world one day, it is so critical for them to be able to emote and speak clearly about the underpinnings of what make them who they are, without them having to check their spirituality at the door. For me, I am of the Christian faith, but I have podcast guests today, just today, who are atheists. I have podcast guests who are of the Baha'i faith. I have podcast guests who are Hindu, of the divine hand. I have podcast guests who are Muslim, so you'll see when you watch the entire series, we are all interfaith, intergenerational. We're all just trying to do the doggone thing, because there was once a world that'll crucify us if we did what we're doing now. So we're so grateful to have this space. And also, I would like to thank my time at Harvard for giving me the courage to have this platform, because I didn't have the courage to do that. And also shout out to Dr. Urban Scott's class, Faith, Education, and Leadership, that allowed me just recently to say, okay, I'm going to make spirituality an actual pillar of the leadership redemption framework. And I want my guests to talk about it. And I want them to be as courageous talking about it. And if we have to take the whole podcast talking about it, because it's deeply important to who you are. So now this gets into, so as we end our podcast, I always say, at this table, I hope that you have been well fed, that the meal that we've served has been our intellectual excellence, our vulnerability. We've opened up our lives to you today. We didn't have to do that, or probably didn't want to do that today, but it is something that we thought that it was a very important, critical time of crises, that we should be just a portal that you can look through, or a keyhole that you can say, I see a little bit more hope than I did before I watched this. If we've done that, you have been fed. Also, you have learned, you have been lectured, you have been guided, you've been through a spiritual class today, okay? So you have been fed spiritually. You've also had to have a boost or a shot of vitamins as we talked about life skills, we talked about the ways that Scott, in particular, from his roots all the way up, he's staying true to who he is. He's going from the bottom to the middle to the top, making sure he honor and keep intact the person that he's meant to be. And even if he's not sure at all times, trust me, the next time you see him, it's going to be still something that you can learn and glean from and be that kind of leader that says, I might not know it right now, but give me a 5 minutes, I'll get it to you, right? So we're into now a way of thinking that is requiring us to be way more flexible, way more loving, way more patient, way more merciful, way more gracious towards everybody that we meet. If you're not doing that, I want to encourage you to find your why and find out what that work you're going to do, because inside of it is embedded a level of compassion that you will be able to give to someone else. So keep yourself encouraged by us, right? And keep yourself so devoted to finding your purpose. If you don't have one, or you don't think you have one, or you're in need of a repurposing, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Listen to the podcast. Listen to every single thing Scott said today. And then decide. Take a moment to decide. Because guess what I'm going to ask you? So what brings you to the table? The table of redemption. What lives have you changed? How has humanity benefited from your struggles and your victory? So tell me, how can we help you? Bring you to a table? How can we use our Harvardness or our platforms to make you know you are worthy? You are valuable. You are important, and you are you. And it's just time for us to come from a place of deep conviction and redemption until we find out who we really are and give that to the world. So I want to sign off as Rasheen Jamison-Richardson, your host, your founder of this podcast, producer, editor, and everything. And thank you to you, Scott, once again for taking the time to come here and give us all this beautiful wisdom that you have at such a young age, and your courage. I mean, from top to bottom, it is impeccable. So thank you. So everyone, we want to say goodbye.